There's something most people don't know about Nagato. The name Pain has become one of the most feared in the entire Naruto story, spoken like a title belonging to a god who watches over the village hidden in the rain. But the truth is far quieter, far sadder than that reputation suggests. Behind all that power stands a single person, a frail young man with red hair, orphaned early, born into a clan that most of the world had already forgotten. His name was Nagato, and he came from Amegakure, the rain-soaked land where the sky seems to weep without ever stopping. Now, you'd be forgiven for making a simple mistake here. When Naruto finally faces Pain, he sees a tall, commanding figure with piercing eyes and orange hair, moving with terrifying confidence across the ruins of the Leaf Village. It feels natural to assume this is the real enemy, the mastermind, the one to defeat. But that body isn't Nagato at all. It's a corpse. It's the reanimated shell of a man Nagato once knew, controlled remotely, like a puppet on invisible strings. The real Nagato is nowhere on that battlefield. He's hidden away, tucked deep inside a hidden tower, his body so broken and wasted that he can barely move on his own. So the villain everyone fears turns out to be a body without a soul, while the true person pulls every string from the shadows, weak and unseen. To understand how a frail young man could command that kind of power, you have to look at his eyes. Kishimoto didn't give Nagato an ordinary ability. He gave him the Rinnegan, described in the series as the most exalted of the three great eye techniques, ranked above even the Sharingan and the Byakugan. In the mythology of this world, the Rinnegan is tied directly to the Sage of the Six Paths, the legendary figure said to have founded ninjutsu itself and shaped the world as we know it. To possess these eyes is to be seen as something close to a god, a rightful heir to that ancient power. So when the people of the rain looked upon Nagato, they weren't just seeing a strong ninja. They were seeing what they believed to be a divine inheritance made flesh. But here's the part that quietly complicates everything. Nagato appears to awaken the Rinnegan as a child, in a moment of unbearable trauma, the loss of his parents during war. And that raises a question the story eventually answers in a surprising way. Because the Rinnegan wasn't truly born from within him. It didn't belong to his bloodline naturally the way the Sharingan belongs to the Uchiha. Those eyes were transplanted into him, placed there by Madara Uchiha, long before Nagato was old enough to understand what he carried. Madara, working from the shadows near the end of his life, had been planning far ahead, and Nagato was a piece in a design that stretched across generations. So the power everyone worshipped as a gift from the heavens was really a seed planted by a schemer, waiting patiently to grow. The god of the rain was, in a sense, an experiment. And yet Nagato wasn't chosen at random. There was a reason his small, fragile body could survive carrying eyes that would have destroyed almost anyone else. Nagato belonged to the Uzumaki clan, the same clan marked by swirling red hair, famous throughout the world for two things above all. The first is their enormous reserves of chakra, a life energy so vast and dense that it borders on the supernatural. The second is their unusual longevity, their bodies able to endure and recover in ways others simply cannot. This is why Nagato could host the transplanted Rinnegan without immediately dying, and why he could sustain so many bodies, so much destruction, from a single ruined frame. His clan's blood was the vessel that made the whole plan possible. But that same detail carries a quiet weight that many viewers miss on a first watch. The Uzumaki clan is the very same clan that Naruto himself descends from. It's written into his name, into his heritage, into the swirl stitched onto the shoulders of the Leaf Village's uniforms. A small tribute to a clan that was once a close ally before it was scattered and nearly wiped out. So when Naruto stands across from Pain, he isn't only facing an enemy, he's facing distant kin. Two orphans, born from the same fading bloodline, shaped by the same losses, standing on opposite sides of the same war. Neither of them knows how deeply they're connected, but the story quietly ties them together by blood long before they ever meet. And so, the figure known as the God of the Hidden Rain begins to come into focus, not as a monster, but as a broken boy from a forgotten clan, carrying borrowed eyes and a borrowed purpose, mistaken by the world for something divine. What very few people realize is that Pain, the figure who marches into the hidden leaf and brings an entire village to its knees, was never actually a single person standing on that battlefield. What the world sees as one god is really 6 separate bodies, each one a corpse, each one reanimated and driven forward by thin black rods called chakra receivers, driven straight through the skin. These rods act like antennas. Nagato, the real man behind the legend, sits far away, hidden and broken, and through those receivers he channels his chakra into each body, moving them the way a puppeteer moves marionettes on invisible strings. And this is the quiet genius of it. Because Nagato controls these bodies remotely, he never has to bring his own fragile, ruined frame anywhere near the fighting. His true body is weak, wasted away, kept alive by machinery in a hidden tower. So the version of Pain that the Leaf Ninja are desperately trying to kill is never the version that actually matters. They cut one body down, but another simply steps forward, because there was never a single beating heart to stop. That is why he feels unkillable throughout the entire invasion. You cannot win a fight against a man who isn't in the room. Together, these 6 corpses are called the 6 Paths of Pain. And here is where Kishimoto's design choices start to reveal themselves. Each of the 6 is named after one of the 6 realms of rebirth in Buddhist cosmology: the Deva Path, the Asura Path, the Human Path, the Animal Path, the Preta Path, and the Naraka Path. This wasn't a random aesthetic. In Buddhism, these 6 realms represent the different states a soul can be reborn into, from the heavenly to the hellish. Kishimoto took that ancient framework and mapped it directly onto his villain, using a spiritual concept about suffering and rebirth as the literal blueprint for a fighting force. But he didn't stop at borrowing the names. He gave each path a completely distinct ability so that no single body could do everything. The Deva Path controls gravity, pushing and pulling the world itself. The Asura Path becomes a living weapon, its body armored and mechanical. The Human Path can read minds by touching a person's head, tearing the soul straight out. The Animal Path summons creatures. The Preta Path absorbs chakra and neutralizes ninjutsu. And the Naraka Path can interrogate and even restore the others. Separately, each one has a glaring weakness, but because Nagato controls them all at once, they cover for each other perfectly, forming one complete, seamless fighting system with no blind spots. It's a design that turns 6 flawed pieces into a single, flawless whole. And this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Because for all 6 bodies, Nagato didn't create them from nothing. He built them from real corpses. Each path is the reanimated body of a dead ninja he collected, and their original abilities carried over into the paths. That's why the Animal Path, for instance, retained a specific summoning bloodline. He wasn't just assembling puppets, he was harvesting the dead, choosing bodies whose living talents would strengthen the machine he was building. But the most haunting choice sits with the most iconic body of all. When people picture Pain, they almost always picture the same face, the one with the spiky orange hair, the calm eyes, the quiet authority. That body is the Deva Path, the leader of the 6, the one who speaks, the one who delivers the philosophy, the one everyone remembers. And here is the detail that reframes the entire character once you know it. That body is not a stranger. It is the corpse of Yahiko, Nagato's closest childhood friend, the boy he grew up with, the one who once dreamed of bringing peace to their war-torn country. Yahiko died years earlier, and Nagato, unable to let him go, preserved his body and made it the face of pain. So every time the Deva Path speaks about pain, about suffering, about the cost of war, the words are technically coming from the mouth of the friend Nagato lost. He turned his greatest grief into his greatest weapon, and he chose to lead with that face specifically, the face that meant everything to him. It's a detail that's easy to miss on a first watch, but once you see it, the whole invasion changes color. The god crushing the leaf is really a mourning man speaking through a dead friend. So the picture that finally comes together is this. Pain is not a monster, not a single overwhelming force of nature, but an elaborate structure built out of loss. 6 borrowed bodies, ancient Buddhist names, a puppeteer too broken to fight, and at the very center of it all, a boy who couldn't accept that his friend was gone. Everything the world feared about the god of the hidden rain was, underneath, a memorial to grief. The story of Yahiko begins with a strange statistic, one that catches almost every new fan off guard. When people list the most feared organizations in the Naruto world, the Akatsuki sits near the very top. It's a roster of S-rank criminals, missing nin from nearly every major village, men and women hunted across the continent. And yet, the founder of that organization was never a criminal at all. He was a war orphan who wanted the fighting to stop. Yahiko grew up in Amegakure, the hidden rain, a small country wedged between larger nations that used its land as a battlefield. That detail matters more than it seems. The hidden rain wasn't a superpower. It was collateral damage, a place caught in the crossfire of wars it never started. So the children who survived there grew up under a very specific kind of pressure, the kind that either breaks a person or turns them into an idealist. Yahiko became the second kind. Here's the part that surprises people. The word Akatsuki, before it ever meant a black cloak with red clouds, meant something closer to a dawn. Yahiko didn't found a mercenary group. He founded a peaceful movement, a small band of like-minded people who believed the endless cycle of war could actually be ended through understanding rather than force. He was the charismatic one, the speaker, the face. Nagato had the power, and Konan held them together. But Yahiko was the voice that convinced others it was possible. That contrast is worth sitting with for a moment, because it reframes everything that comes later. Most viewers meet the Akatsuki as villains first. They see the coats, the ring system, the tailed beast hunts, and they assume it was always a criminal enterprise. But the original Akatsuki had no interest in that. Its whole purpose was to make Amegakure a country that could defend itself, and, eventually, to spread that stability outward. It was pacifist in intent. So the organization the world learned to fear was, at its root, built on the opposite of what it became. The trouble came from a man named Hanzo. Hanzo was the ruler of the Hidden Rain, a legendary shinobi so powerful that surviving an encounter with him was considered an honor in its own right. And a growing movement of idealistic young people, gaining followers and influence in his own country, looked to him like exactly one thing: a threat to his rule. So he decided to remove it, but he didn't do it openly. Yet the most unexpected part is still to come, because the way Hanzo chose to destroy the Akatsuki was designed to break them from the inside rather than simply defeat them. He arranged a meeting, presented as a chance to talk. Then he sprang a trap. Working alongside Danzo of the Hidden Leaf, he captured Konan and forced the group into an impossible position. he gave Nagato a choice that no one should ever have to make. Kill Yahiko yourself, or watch Konan die. Think about the cruelty of that design. Hanzo didn't just want them dead. He wanted their bond turned into a weapon against them. And this is where the record of Yahiko's life ends, but also where his real influence begins. Because Yahiko made the decision for Nagato. Understanding that his friend could never bring himself to strike, and that hesitation would get all of them killed, Yahiko threw himself onto the kunai in Nagato's hand. He impaled himself. He chose his own death to force his friend to live. That single act is arguably the most consequential moment in the entire Akatsuki story, and it's easy to miss just how far its effects reach. Yahiko's sacrifice was meant as a gift, a way to save the people he loved. But it did something he never intended. It shattered Nagato's faith in the very peace they had built their movement around. The boy who had believed in ending war watched war take his best friend anyway. And in that moment, the idealist died alongside the leader. And so we arrive at the detail that ties this whole passage together, the one that unsettles fans the most once they understand it. When Nagato later rebuilt himself into the figure the world knows as Pain, the body he chose to lead the 6 paths, the central figure, the one that speaks and commands, was Yahiko's own preserved corpse. The face the ninja world came to fear as a god was not Nagato's face at all. It was the face of the friend he had lost. So every time the Hidden Rain's god appeared, calm and terrifying, delivering sermons about pain and peace, it was Yahiko's features moving, Yahiko's body standing at the front. The man who founded the Akatsuki to end suffering became, after death, the literal mask of the organization that spread it. A memorial, animated by grief, wearing the face of the one person who had believed the most. Behind the familiar appearance of Konan, there is a story that quietly rearranges everything you think you understand about the Hidden Rain. She is often remembered as the calm one, the woman who stood a step behind Pain, silent, folding paper, watching. But that quietness hides the fact that she was there from the very beginning. She was the third orphan of the trio, raised in the same rubble as Nagato and Yahiko, 3 starving children who found each other in a country soaked by endless war. They were not comrades who met as adults and chose a cause. They were siblings in everything but blood, shaped by the same hunger, the same rain, the same refusal to keep dying quietly. And that shared childhood is exactly why her role feels counterintuitive. You would expect the founding members of a movement to be equals, 3 voices arguing over direction. But that is not how it went. Yahiko became the face, the fire, the one who believed. Nagato became the power, and Konan, in most retellings, becomes the background. Yet if you look closely, she is arguably the most human of the 3, precisely because she never lost herself the way the others did. Her signature ability is where the story turns strange. Konan can turn her own body into countless thin sheets of paper. Not paper she carries, not paper she summons from a scroll, but paper that is literally her. She folds it into origami, into messengers, into small butterflies that drift through the air carrying her awareness. And when she needs to move quickly, she spreads that paper into a pair of wings and simply lifts off the ground. It looks delicate. It looks almost decorative. But that softness is the disguise, because those same sheets can be layered into shields, or bladed edges, or thousands of drifting fragments that surround an enemy before they realize the whole battlefield has become her body. Now here is the detail that most people overlook. Kishimoto, the author, deliberately tied this power to the one place it should never have existed. Konan lives in Amegakure, the village hidden in the rain, a country defined by water falling from the sky almost without pause. And paper, of all materials, is the single thing most helpless against water. Wet paper tears. Wet paper collapses. Wet paper cannot fold, cannot fly, cannot hold an edge. So the author built a poetic weakness directly into her design, giving the strongest kunoichi of the rain a body made of the one substance her own homeland threatens every single day. It is a quiet contradiction, and it is intentional. But here's what almost nobody knows. During the era when Nagato controlled the 6 paths of pain, when the world believed it was facing a god with multiple bodies, every one of those 6 bodies was a corpse. They were dead shinobi, reanimated, wired with black receivers, moved like puppets from a distance. Every one of them was hollow, except that Konan was standing right beside them the entire time, and she was not one of them. She kept her own body. She kept her own mind. She kept her own will. In a group where the leader had literally replaced human beings with controlled cadavers, she was the only member of that inner circle who remained fully, genuinely alive, thinking her own thoughts, choosing to stay. So she became something no puppet could ever be. She was Pain's silent partner, yes, but also his messenger, the one who carried words across the world when the bodies of Pain could not leave the tower. She was the bridge between the machine and the man. And because she alone still felt grief, she alone still remembered Yahiko and Nagato and the 3 children they had once been. Which brings us to the ending, and it is the part that flips the whole picture one final time. You might assume that once both Yahiko and Nagato were gone, Konan simply faded away, a quiet, grieving figure with nothing left to protect. The opposite is true. Long after Nagato's death, she guarded his legacy and his village alone. And when the man who called himself the true mastermind came to seize Nagato's eyes and everything they stood for, she did not fold. She had spent that time preparing. In total secrecy, she had assembled a single trap of almost unimaginable scale. 600 billion explosive paper tags, layered across an entire sea, one detonation after another, meant to erase the enemy completely. She poured everything she was into that final act, and she gave her own life to defend the memory of 2 boys who had died believing the world could be gentler than it had been to them. So the quiet one, the woman in the background, turns out to be the last believer standing. Not the god, not the puppets, the one who stayed human. And that is the truth hiding behind the familiar face of Konan. If you look closely at Jiraiya, you start to notice something strange about his place in this whole story. He is remembered as a legendary Sannin, as Naruto's teacher, as the goofy old man chasing women and writing books. But that reputation hides one of the most important accidents in the entire history of the Hidden Leaf. Because long before Naruto, long before any of the famous battles, Jiraiya made a small decision that would quietly shape everything that came after. It happened during the Second Great Ninja War. The fighting had torn through Amegakure, the village hidden in the rain, and left behind the usual wreckage of any war. Orphans. 3 of them in particular, starving, hiding in the ruins, stealing food just to see another morning. Their names were Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan. Now, most shinobi would have walked past them. The war was ending, and there was nothing to gain from 3 hungry children in enemy territory. But Jiraiya stayed behind. He chose to remain in the rain and take care of them, and that single choice is where the tragedy is born. He didn't just feed them, he taught them. He trained them in ninjutsu, showed them how to survive on their own, and stayed long enough to see the boy Nagato begin to master techniques that stunned even him. Jiraiya recognized something rare in that child, a talent that hinted at greatness, maybe even at the fulfillment of an old prophecy about a student who would change the world. So he invested in him. He believed in him. And then, once the children could stand on their own, he left them and returned home, thinking he had done a good thing. Here is the bitter irony, and it's the kind of detail that makes this whole saga feel almost cruel. Jiraiya trained many students in his life. He trained Minato, the fourth Hokage. He trained Naruto, the boy who would eventually save the world. But his most powerful pupil, the one who truly surpassed everyone, was not either of them. It was Nagato. The quiet orphan from the rain became the man the world would come to know as Pain, and eventually the single most dangerous enemy the Hidden Leaf ever faced. The Toad Sage's greatest student became the villain of the story. And behind all of this hides something even more interesting. Because that early kindness, that lucky twist of a teacher staying behind for 3 strangers, didn't just create Konoha's greatest enemy. It also planted the one seed that would allow the enemy to be stopped. Years passed. Jiraiya heard rumors of a mysterious leader controlling the rain, a man who had taken over the entire village, and he went to investigate. He traveled back to Amegakure as a spy, gathering information on the figure called Pain, never once imagining that the trail he was following led straight back to the child he had raised. So he crept through the rain, careful and skilled as always, and he walked directly into the arms of his own former student. The fight that followed was one of the most painful in the series, precisely because Jiraiya didn't understand what he was looking at. He faced the 6 paths of pain, 6 bodies moving as one, and only in his final moments did he begin to grasp the truth. He recognized the eyes, the Rinnegan. He realized, too late, that this god of the rain was connected to the children he had once tried to save. He was outnumbered, outmatched, and eventually killed by the very boy he had believed would bring peace. But here is where the accident turns lucky, where a dying man's last act rewrites the future. Jiraiya, mortally wounded, sinking into the water, did not simply give up. He used the last of his strength to encode a message. He tapped it in code onto the back of one of his toads, a small creature he sent away before he died. That toad carried the secret out of the rain and back to the leaf. The message revealed the true nature of pain, the crucial clue about how the 6 paths really worked, the hidden weakness in a seemingly unstoppable enemy. So think about the chain that runs through all of this. A tired man stays behind after a war to feed 3 orphans. That kindness creates the world's most dangerous villain. But that same relationship, that same history, is what draws Jiraiya back into the rain to spy. His death there looks like a total loss, a legend falling for nothing. And yet the code he leaves behind is the exact thread that Naruto later pulls to win. The teacher's final gift reaches the student he raised too late to save, and passes to the student he raised in time. None of it was planned. It was a series of accidents, small mercies and terrible coincidences, stacked one on top of another. And that is the quiet weight sitting underneath Jiraiya's whole story. People rarely talk about Naruto's fight with Pain as a fight at all. And that's the strange thing about it, because on paper, it should be one of the most violent confrontations in the entire series. 6 bodies, each with its own ability, tearing through the Hidden Leaf, flattening the village into a crater. Naruto returns to find his home in ruins, his teacher dead, and the man responsible standing above it all like a god. Everything about the setup points toward a final, decisive blow. But that's not how it ends. Instead, the emotional peak of the series arrives not with a punch, but with a conversation. Naruto pins Nagato down, has every reason to kill him, and chooses something harder. He talks, he asks questions, he listens, and slowly, the man behind pain begins to answer. That reversal is what makes the arc feel so different from everything around it, because you're braced for an execution, and what you get instead is an argument about whether hatred can ever really be broken. To understand why that lands so heavily, you have to look at where the story came from. Kishimoto reportedly wrote this arc while thinking about real-world cycles of violence, about how pain passes from one person to the next, generation after generation. So he built Nagato, not as a cartoon villain, but as a wounded man with a logic you can almost follow. Nagato lost his parents in a war he didn't start. He watched his closest friend die. And out of that grief, he decided the only way to teach the world peace was to make it feel the same pain he had felt. It's a broken philosophy, but it isn't a stupid one, and that's exactly what makes it unsettling. This is where the connection to the wider Naruto universe quietly opens up, and it's easy to miss. Nagato wasn't raised in isolation. He was one of 3 orphans trained by Jiraiya during his years in the rain, the same Jiraiya whose whole story rests on accidents and small mercies. So the man tearing Konoha apart was, in a very real sense, Jiraiya's student, shaped by the same hands that later shaped Naruto. 2 students of one teacher, standing on opposite ends of the same idea, one who chose hatred and one who refused it. The fight isn't really Naruto against a stranger. It's a family argument that spans the entire world of the series. And that's the thread that ties this passage back to where we just were. None of it was planned, remember. Jiraiya took in those rain orphans out of duty and grief, never knowing that one of them would grow into the greatest threat the Leaf had ever faced, or that the very first novel he wrote would one day give another boy the name Naruto. The connections run underneath everything, quiet and unbroken, linking a wandering teacher to the god of the hidden rain, to the boy who would talk him down. But what's really surprising comes next, because when Naruto finally reaches Nagato, he doesn't win by proving him wrong with force. He wins by offering a different answer to the exact same question Nagato spent his life asking. How do you break a cycle of pain? Nagato's answer was more pain. Naruto's answer, drawn straight from Jiraiya's teaching, is to endure it without passing it on. And the astonishing part is that Nagato actually accepts it. He's moved not by being beaten, but by being understood. So Nagato makes a choice that almost no antagonist in the series ever makes. With the last of his strength, drained and dying, he performs the samsara of heavenly life technique, a forbidden art that trades the user's own life to restore others. And he uses it to revive every person in Konoha he had just killed. The village he destroyed is brought back by the very man who destroyed it. It costs him everything. He dies moments later, his body finally giving out, having undone his own greatest crime. That single act changes what kind of story this was. Because Pain doesn't die defeated on the battlefield, cut down in combat. He dies redeemed, having chosen belief over despair in his final breath. It makes him one of the very few Naruto antagonists to end that way, not crushed by a stronger fighter, but persuaded, and then choosing sacrifice on his own terms. The strongest thing Naruto does in that entire arc is convince someone that the world can be different. And when you place it all side by side, the shape becomes clear. A teacher who acted on instinct and grief. A student who turned that grief into a philosophy of pain. And another student who inherited the opposite lesson and carried it back to the man who'd forgotten it. The fight against pain isn't the end of a battle. It's the moment the whole quiet chain of accidents finally closes, one hand reaching back to answer another.
Curiously enough, Obito was the one name that never appeared on any list of Akatsuki's leaders, and that absence was the whole point.
For most of the story, the world believed Pain sat at the top of the organization, the unquestioned voice behind every order, the god who spoke and expected obedience. But the truth, when it finally surfaces, quietly rearranges everything you thought you understood. Pain, the being who ruled the hidden reign and terrified entire nations, was himself taking direction from someone standing even deeper in the shadows. And that someone was Obito Uchiha, hiding for years behind the swirled orange mask, calling himself Toby, playing the fool so convincingly that even his own allies underestimated him. The setup is deceptively simple. A masked man appears at Nagato's side, offering purpose, offering direction, and Nagato accepts it. What Nagato doesn't fully grasp is that this man is not a partner, but a designer, shaping the Akatsuki toward a goal Nagato never truly saw. Nagato had been given something extraordinary long before any of this began. The Rinnegan, the legendary eyes tied to the founder of the ninja world, did not simply awaken in Nagato by chance. They were transplanted into him by Madara Uchiha, a gift with a purpose attached, a debt he would spend his entire life repaying without ever knowing the full size of the bill. So the tension here is quiet but enormous. Nagato believed his suffering had meaning. He believed the pain he inflicted would push the world toward understanding. But every step of that campaign, every tailed beast the Akatsuki hunted, every village they destabilized, fed a plan that had nothing to do with Nagato's philosophy of peace. Obito was steering the whole enterprise toward what he called the Eye of the Moon plan, a vision of casting a single, infinite illusion over all of humanity. The tailed beasts weren't trophies, they were ingredients. And Nagato, for all his power, was gathering them for a future he would never be told about. That is where the tragedy sharpens. A man who thought he was the author of his own war was, in the deepest sense, a chapter in someone else's book. And this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Because when you follow the chain of manipulation backward, you realize how carefully Obito chose his instrument. Nagato was ideal precisely because he was sincere. His grief was real. His conviction was real. His willingness to become a monster in the name of peace was real. A cynical man would have questioned his handler. A true believer never does. Obito understood that the most reliable weapon is a person who thinks the mission is their own idea. So he fed Nagato just enough purpose to keep the machine running, and he stepped back into the dark and let conviction do the rest. The resolution of this arrangement is cold enough to change how you read the entire saga. After Nagato finally spent the last of his strength, after he chose in his final moments to reverse everything and give life back to the village he had ruined, his body was left behind in the rain, and Obito came for it. He did not come to mourn. He did not come to honor a fallen ally who had served him for years. He came to retrieve the Rinnegan, to take those legendary eyes back out of the corpse and carry them forward as tools for the next phase of the plan. To Obito, Nagato had always been a vessel, and the eyes had always been on loan. So the legacy of pain divides into two directions at once. On the surface, Nagato's story ends with a moment of grace, a decision to believe in the next generation, and to invest his hope in the boy who refused to answer pain with more pain. That choice ripples outward, and it genuinely reshapes the people it touches. But underneath that redemption runs a much darker thread. The entire reign of terror that Nagato conducted, the invasions, the assassinations,
the godlike performance in front of a broken world. All of it quietly served a scheme he never fully understood. His hands moved, but another mind had drawn the map. That contrast is what gives his life its lasting weight. He was powerful enough to level a village with a single word, yet he was still being used. He was intelligent, disciplined, and utterly committed. Yet the shape of his suffering had been engineered by someone who watched him from behind a mask and felt nothing when he died. And so the impact of pain is not simply the destruction he caused. It is the demonstration of how grief can be harvested, how conviction can be steered, and how a man can spend his whole life certain he is fighting for peace, while unknowingly building the foundation for something far larger and far colder than anything he ever imagined. Originally, Deva Path was the face that everyone learned to fear, the body that stepped forward whenever the name Pain was spoken aloud. It has the orange spiked hair, the calm posture, the ringed eyes that seem to look straight through you. And because of that, most people assume this is Nagato himself, standing there in the rain, delivering judgment. But it isn't. This body belonged to Yahiko, Nagato's closest childhood friend, a boy who died long before the war ever reached its climax. Nagato preserved that corpse, threaded it with black receivers, and learned to pilot it from far away, hidden and immobile, watching through borrowed eyes. So the figure the world came to know as the god of the hidden rain was, in truth, a grieving man wearing the face of the friend he could not save. That single choice shaped everything that followed. Because Nagato controlled all 6 bodies remotely, he needed each one to specialize, to carry a fragment of his full power rather than the whole of it. The Deva Path received the ability that would become its signature: control over attraction and repulsion. On the surface, that looks like 2 separate techniques. There is Shinra Tensei, a repulsive force that pushes everything away, flattening buildings, scattering enemies, carving craters into the earth. And there is Bansho Tenin, the opposite motion, a pull that draws people and objects helplessly toward the user. For a long time, viewers treated these as 2 distinct jutsu, 2 tools in a wide arsenal. But here is the counterintuitive part, the detail that quietly rewrites how the whole fight makes sense. Those 2 techniques are not 2 powers at all. They are the same power, simply reversed. It is one gravitational force, and Nagato chooses only whether it flows outward or inward, push or pull. That elegance is also the reason the Deva Path felt almost invincible for so long, because an opponent could neither charge in nor be thrown clear without the gravity itself deciding their fate. And yet a force that unified carries a hidden cost. Every time that gravity is used, it needs time to recover before it can fire again. That recharge window is the single true weakness of the entire Deva Path, and almost nothing else about the body offers a way in. Yet the most unexpected part is still to come, because this is where the story turns into something closer to a famous, iconic exploit, the kind of flaw that fans dissect frame by frame. The recharge on Shinra Tensei was reportedly tied by Kishimoto to a hidden rhythm, a roughly 5-second interval that governed how often the repulsion could be unleashed. On the page, that number is easy to overlook. In practice, it becomes the whole key to the battle. For most of the fight, that timing works flawlessly. Shinra Tensei erases every attack that comes near, and the pattern of repulsions feels like a wall that cannot be breached, a barrage that resets faster than any single warrior can react. So the solution had to attack the rhythm itself rather than the body. Naruto, unable to overpower the gravity head-on, turned instead to numbers and to patience. By flooding the field with shadow clones, He forced the Deva Path to spend its repulsion again and again, draining that 5-second window over and over until the timing could be read. And once the interval became visible, it became beatable. The clones absorbed the pushes, counted the silence between them, and finally slipped an attack into the exact gap where the gravity had not yet recovered. What looked like an unstoppable defense turned out to be a clock, and the clock could be timed. That moment, where an apparent glitch in the power became the very thing that undid it, is one of the most quietly satisfying reversals in the entire series, because the weakness was there in plain sight the whole time. There is one more detail that outlived the fight and settled permanently into the way people remember this character. The purplish, ringed eyes staring out of that calm face are the Rinnegan, the rarest and most storied of the great eye techniques. The same eyes tied to the founder of the ninja world's oldest legends. Nagato piloted the Deva Path more often than any of the other 5 bodies, keeping it at the front of nearly every confrontation. So, over time, that specific face, Yahiko's face, wearing Nagato's borrowed eyes, became the visual shorthand for the entire Pain persona. When artists draw pain, when fans picture the name, this is almost always the body they render. A dead friend's features, animated by a distant, sorrowful hand, standing in for a whole philosophy of pain and peace. And so, the Deva Path endures as something more than a set of techniques. It is a grave that learned to walk, a single gravitational force disguised as 2, and a defense so complete that its only flaw was a rhythm quiet enough to count. All of it wrapped around the face of a boy who never lived to see what his death would become. One often overlooked detail about Asura Path is that its entire body was engineered like a weapon rather than a warrior. Where the other 5 paths leaned on chakra, biology, and abilities drawn from the living world, this one hid machinery beneath its skin. Extra arms could unfold from its back. Blades slid out from concealed panels. Missiles were built into its shoulders and chest, and even a spinning drill could launch from an arm that split apart like a puppet coming undone. So while the other bodies looked like people, this one looked like something assembled, a mannequin filled with artillery. That puppet and machine aesthetic set it apart in a very deliberate way. Kishimoto wanted each of the 6 paths to feel distinct, and Asura Path became the mechanical one, the body that carried its own private war factory inside it. But the reason it looks the way it does isn't just style. It reaches back into something much older than the manga. The 6 paths of pain were loosely based on the 6 realms of Buddhist rebirth, the 6 states a soul can be reborn into according to that cosmology. There's the human realm, the animal realm, the realm of hungry ghosts, the heavenly realm, the hell realm, and the realm of the Asura. Each of Nagato's bodies was named for one of these, and the Asura realm has a very specific meaning. It's the domain of the demigods, powerful, prideful beings consumed by jealousy and locked in endless war with the heavens above them. They fight not because they must, but because they cannot stop. So a body named after that realm being turned into a walking arsenal isn't a coincidence at all. The warlike design is the reference. The missiles and blades are the myth made literal. And here's where it gets quietly clever. In Buddhist tradition, the Asura are often depicted with multiple arms, extra limbs sprouting from their bodies as a sign of their martial power and their restless aggression. So when this body unfolds a second and third pair of arms, it isn't just a special effect. It's a direct visual echo of centuries-old religious art, hidden inside a ninja battle where almost no viewer would think to look for it. But here's what almost nobody knows. Despite being built to look like the single most dangerous of the 6, the one bristling with weapons, the one you'd expect to be saved for last, The Asura Path was actually one of the first to fall during the invasion of the Hidden Leaf. It was torn apart before it could ever unleash the full scope of its firepower. So the body designed to represent endless, unstoppable war ended up being one of the shortest lived on the battlefield. There's an odd kind of poetry in that, whether Kishimoto intended it or not. The Asura in myth are doomed to lose their war against the heavens, no matter how fiercely they fight. And here, the body named after them was undone almost as soon as it arrived. That contrast, deadly appearance, brief existence, makes it easy to forget there was ever a real person underneath all that metal. But there was. Like every one of Pain's bodies, the Asura Path had once been a living shinobi with a name and a history. Once his corpse was reanimated and threaded with Nagato's chakra receivers, that history was erased. His face was permanently split and masked, hidden behind panels of black metal, so that the man he used to be could never be recognized again. The person he had once been became the war machine, the exact opposite of what he was in life. So think about the layers stacked inside this one character. On the surface, a mechanical monster. Beneath that, a Buddhist demigod of jealous war, complete with the extra arms drawn from ancient religious imagery. And beneath even that, a forgotten shinobi whose earlier life was overwritten by the loudest, most violent body in the entire lineup. Kishimoto rarely explained these details out loud. They sit in the background, waiting for anyone curious enough to notice them. And that's really the quiet genius of the 6 paths as a whole. Each one looks like a simple enemy design at a glance, but each is carrying a piece of a real cosmological map, a system for how souls suffer and are reborn. The Asura Path just happens to wear its meaning the most openly, in the form of missiles and drills and unfolding limbs. Once you know what the Asura realm represents, you can't unsee it. The weapon and the myth become the same thing. So the next time this body appears, arms splitting, blades emerging, the drill spinning free, remember that you're not just watching a fight. You're watching a centuries-old idea about war, pride, and rebirth, quietly disguised as a mechanical man on a battlefield. A demigod of endless conflict, built from the corpse of someone who once lived a life far removed from the war it now wages. Here's something genuinely fascinating about Preta Path. Of all the 6 bodies Nagato controls, this is the one that seems, at first glance, almost boring. It doesn't summon monsters. It doesn't tear through the earth or read your mind. Its entire purpose is a single idea: absorption. It can swallow any chakra-based attack thrown at it, drinking in ninjutsu that would otherwise flatten most opponents where they stand. A fireball, a wall of water, a lightning blade aimed straight at the heart. The Preta Path simply reaches out, and the technique vanishes into its palms as if it had never existed. And when you sit with that idea, you start to see how quietly devastating it really is. Because most ninja, when they're pushed into a corner, do the same thing. They reach deeper into their arsenal of jutsu. They escalate. They pour more chakra into bigger, flashier techniques, certain that enough power will break through. But against the Preta Path, that instinct is a trap. Every jutsu you throw at it isn't an attack. It's a meal. You're not wearing it down. You're feeding it. So the harder a technique-reliant fighter tries, the stronger their enemy becomes, and the more helpless they feel, without ever understanding why. That's what makes this body the ultimate counter to a certain kind of shinobi, the specialist, the prodigy who has built their entire identity around a signature technique. Against the Preta Path, brilliance becomes fuel. Therefore, the fight stops being about who has the more powerful jutsu and becomes about something much older and much simpler. Because here's the twist. For all its power, the Preta Path has a glaring blind spot, one that almost feels like a flaw the designers left in on purpose. It can absorb chakra, yes, but it cannot absorb physical force. A plain, honest punch, a kick, a taijutsu strike with nothing mystical behind it at all. Those pass right through its defense as if the absorption were never there. So the deadliest counter to a body that eats energy isn't more energy. It's the oldest weapon a human being has ever owned, a closed fist. That's the contradiction sitting at the heart of this design, and behind all of this hides something even more interesting. Because the name itself is a clue to what the Preta Path was always meant to be. Preta isn't invented. It comes from Buddhist cosmology, the Preta realm, the world of the hungry ghosts. In that tradition, Pretas are beings trapped by their own craving, spirits cursed with an insatiable hunger they can never satisfy. They're often described with swollen, empty bellies and mouths too narrow to ever take in enough. Endless appetite, endless emptiness. And when you learn that, the design of this body suddenly makes complete sense. A creature whose only function is to devour chakra forever without ever being full. That is a hungry ghost, rendered on a battlefield. So the look was no accident either. Kishimoto drew the Preta Path deliberately gaunt, emaciated, hollow-cheeked, with a wide, gaping mouth that feels perpetually starved. It doesn't look powerful in the way the other paths do. It looks depleted, wanting. And that was the point. Every visual choice reinforces that Buddhist idea of a spirit that can never be satisfied, no matter how much it consumes. The hunger is the character. The emptiness is the design. And this is where the what might have been quietly creeps in. Because a body built entirely around absorption is, on paper, one of the strongest defensive concepts in the whole series. A wall that turns your greatest strength into your greatest weakness. In the hands of a story that leaned harder into strategy, the Preta Path could have been the centerpiece of an entire arc. A puzzle box enemy that forces heroes to abandon everything they trained for and rediscover the basics. But that isn't the role it ended up playing. In practice, it spends much of its screen time in a supporting position, and its most famous moment is the moment it's undone, precisely because someone remembered that a fist doesn't count as chakra. So there's a strange melancholy to it, if you look closely. Here is a body whose concept is almost too clean, too elegant, for the chaos of the battles it's dropped into. A living answer to the question, what beats a ninja who only knows how to be a ninja? And the answer turns out to be humbling. Go back to the beginning. Hit it with your hands. That's what I find so quietly compelling about the Preta Path. It isn't the flashiest of the six. It doesn't need to be. It's an idea, hunger without end, dressed up as a defense that can eat the world but never itself feel whole. A gaunt, wide-mouthed ghost borrowed from a 2,000-year-old tradition, standing on a battlefield, waiting patiently for you to make the one mistake it's counting on. And the moment you stop feeding it and simply reach out and strike, the whole illusion of invincibility quietly falls apart. There's something most people don't know about Naraka Path, and it's that this body, standing quietly among the six, is the one that holds the entire system together. From the outside, it looks like just another vessel wearing the Rinnegan, another silhouette on the battlefield. But behind it stands something far stranger. A giant floating head that rises from the ground, jaws open, eyes fixed forward. This is the King of Hell. And to understand pain, you have to understand this head first, because almost everything that makes pain feel unbeatable begins right here. The Naraka Path summons the King of Hell for two purposes. The first is interrogation. The second, and this is the important one, is restoration. When one of Pain's bodies takes a wound, when it's burned or broken or run through, the Naraka Path doesn't retreat and heal slowly like a normal shinobi would. Instead, it feeds the damaged body into the mouth of the King of Hell. The head closes around it, holds it for a moment, and then the body is pulled back out completely whole, as if nothing had ever touched it. So when you fight Pain and you land a perfect strike, you watch the injury simply undo itself. That's why beating Pain in a straightforward fight feels less like a battle and more like an argument you can't win. Now, the interrogation side is where the older story hides. The King of Hell can judge honesty. It does this by reaching into a target and pulling out a spectral tongue, a ghostly shape drawn straight from the body. If the person speaks the truth, they survive the questioning. But if they lie, the King of Hell tears the soul out entirely, leaving nothing behind. It's a brutal kind of lie detector, and it sounds almost mythological, which makes sense, because it is. That's where the creation history gets interesting, because Kishimoto didn't invent the King of Hell from nothing. The design and the name are drawn from Enma, not the monkey summon Enma from the third Hokage's story, but the older figure both of them are named after. In Buddhist and Hindu tradition, Enma, also known as Yama, is the judge of the dead. He's the one who decides where a soul goes after death, who weighs a person's honesty and their deeds. So the idea of a great head that pulls the truth out of you and passes judgment isn't a random jutsu. It's a direct echo of a 2,000-year-old religious figure whose entire role was to judge souls at the border of the afterlife. And this is the pattern that runs underneath the whole 6 paths of pain. Each path is quietly tied to one of the 6 realms of existence in Buddhist cosmology. The 6 worlds a soul can be reborn into. The Deva realm, the Asura realm, the human realm, the animal realm, the Preta or hungry ghost realm, and the Naraka realm, which is the realm of hell. Naraka Path takes its name from that last one. So the body that heals the others and judges the dishonest is, appropriately, the one named after hell itself, watched over by the judge of the dead. But what's really surprising comes next. Because for all of this power, the healing, the judgment, the sheer weight of the mythology behind it, the King of Hell has a weakness that almost no one thinks to exploit. The Naraka Path can restore the other bodies, but it cannot easily restore itself in the same instant. And more importantly, the whole regeneration system depends on it being present and active. Every path that comes back from the dead comes back through this one head. So the entire network of 6 bodies, this thing that looks like 6 separate invincible enemies, is really running through a single point of failure. That leads to the part that feels almost counterintuitive. The instinct in a fight is to go after whoever is hitting you hardest, the path throwing the strongest attacks, the one that seems most dangerous. But the smart target isn't the strongest path at all. It's this quiet healing hub. Take out the Naraka Path first, remove the King of Hell from the equation, and suddenly, none of the other bodies can regenerate anymore. The wounds you land finally stay landed. The invincibility that felt absolute turns into something with a limit, a countdown instead of a wall. What looked like 6 enemies who could not die becomes 5 enemies who now can. So the Naraka Path sits there in the middle of it all, the least flashy of the 6, the one that never seems to be the main threat, but it carries the oldest idea in the entire design. A judge of souls borrowed from ancient scripture, a head that heals the dead and weighs the truth. It's the reason Pain feels like a god on the battlefield. And it's also, quietly, the single thread that, once pulled, lets the whole thing come undone. What very few people realize is that Animal Path was, in many ways, the quietest of the six, and yet the most crowded. Because while the other paths carried a single defining ability, Animal Path carried a whole menagerie. Its purpose was summoning, calling forth enormous creatures marked with the same rippling Rinnegan pattern that defined every one of Pain's bodies. A giant centipede that could tunnel and coil around a target, a massive crab wreathed in mist, a chameleon large enough to vanish against the terrain, turning invisible while it moved, and, most memorably, a many-headed dog that refused to stay wounded. Now, here's the detail that's easy to miss on a first watch. Every single one of these summons shared those same ringed eyes. That wasn't decoration. In Nagato's design, the eyes were the network. So each beast wasn't just a weapon thrown onto the field. It was another set of eyes, another node in the same shared vision. Nagato could see through the centipede, through the chameleon, through the dog, coordinating them all as extensions of himself. Which meant Animal Path never really fought alone. It fought as a hub, and every creature it called became part of one enormous, watching web. But the summon that people remember most is that multi-headed dog, and there's a genuinely clever bit of design hiding in it. On the surface, it looks like a simple brute. Hit it, and you'd expect it to go down. Except it doesn't. When one of its heads is struck or severed, it doesn't lose the head. It regenerates, and then it multiplies. So a single monster, the more you damage it, becomes 2 heads, then 4, then a growing pack that surrounds you. The instinct in a fight is to strike the thing attacking you. But against this creature, every strike makes the problem worse. It's a small, cruel inversion of the normal rules of battle, and it's exactly the kind of detail that made these fights feel genuinely dangerous rather than routine. And this is where it gets genuinely fascinating, because the body behind this path has a quiet piece of history most viewers never clock. The corpse used as Animal Path was originally a female Amegakure kunoichi. That matters more than it sounds, because among the 6 paths of pain, almost every body was male. Animal Path is one of the very few female corpses in the entire set. It's a small thing, easy to overlook under the piercings and the shared orange hair, but it's a reminder that each of these bodies was once a real person from the Hidden Rain, gathered by Nagato and repurposed into a single shared instrument. They weren't summoned constructs. They were the dead, given new eyes and a new master. So why summoning specifically? Why did this particular path get the beasts? The answer sits in the framework the whole design was built on. The 6 paths of pain are named after the 6 paths of the Buddhist cycle of rebirth, the 6 realms a soul can be born into. There's the human realm, the heavenly realm, the realm of hungry ghosts, and so on. Animal Path takes its name from the animal realm, a state of existence defined by instinct and raw survival, by creatures that act without deliberation, driven only by the need to live and to feed. And once you know that, the fighting style makes complete sense. Animal Path doesn't strike with its own hands the way the others do. It doesn't need clever technique. It simply unleashes feral creatures and lets instinct do the work. The design and the mythology line up perfectly, which is a pattern that runs through all 6 paths once you start looking for it. That's the part that's worth sitting with. Every one of the 6 was matched to its realm with real intention. The Deva Path, the godly one, controls gravity and stands at the center. The human path reads and tears out souls. The animal path, tied to beasts and instinct, summons beasts. Nothing about the assignment is random. Kishimoto built each body to embody its name, and Animal Path embodies its realm by barely fighting like a person at all. It fights like the wild itself, a swarm of eyes and teeth answering a single, silent will. And it circles back to that idea of the network, because in the end, that's what made Pain feel less like 6 enemies and more like one impossible opponent. Each summon extended the vision. Each beast fed information back. When the dog multiplied, and the chameleon vanished, and the centipede burrowed, they were all reporting to the same mind, all seeing through the same rippled eyes. Animal Path was never really about any single creature. It was about presence, about filling the field with more of Nagato than any single body could hold. Quiet, patient, and everywhere at once. And like everything else about Pain, it looked like overwhelming strength, right up until you understood exactly how it worked. The story of Human Path begins with a quiet contradiction, because among the 6 bodies Nagato controlled, this was the one that almost never fought. It didn't rush the front line. It didn't summon anything. It carried no obvious weapon at all. And yet, if you measured the paths by how much damage they actually did to Konoha, this one might have caused more than any of them, without ever throwing a punch. Here's why. The Human Path had a single signature move, and it was strange enough that people often forget it counts as a technique. It would place one open hand flat against a person's head, hold them still, and then pull. Not pull them off their feet, but pull something out of them, something you can't grab under normal circumstances. It reached in and drew the soul upward. And in that moment, it read the mind completely. Every memory the target had ever formed, laid bare in an instant. Think about what that means as an intelligence tool. Most spies gather fragments, a stolen document here, a whispered rumor there, and then someone spends weeks trying to fit those pieces together. The Human Path skipped all of that. It didn't collect clues about a secret. It collected the secret directly, and everything around it, in one continuous stream. So when Pain needed to know how Konoha was defended, or where the 9 Tails was being kept, this was the body that answered the question. The other 5 paths broke walls. This one broke the very idea of keeping a secret. But there's a detail buried in that ability that quietly reshapes everything. And it's the part most people gloss over. Drawing a soul out this way is not a scan you walk away from. It kills the target. Every single time. There is no gentle version of it. No version where the person wakes up dizzy and confused an hour later. The moment the soul leaves the body is finished. So every interrogation the Human Path ever performed was also an execution, which means Pain could only ask each source exactly 1 question's worth of memories, once, before that source was gone forever. That's the surprising statistic hiding underneath the horror. Compare it to a normal interrogator, who can return to the same prisoner again and again, checking a story, catching a lie, following a new lead that surfaced yesterday. The Human Path had a lifetime interrogation limit of 1 per person. It was, in a strange sense, the most powerful information-gathering technique in the series, and also the least repeatable. Infinite depth, 0 second chances. And yet, the most unexpected part is still to come. Because for all that power, the body itself was not some ancient warlord or legendary shinobi. Like every path, the human path had once been a real, ordinary person. His former identity was a ninja from a small, hidden village, an unremarkable life that ended when Nagato claimed his corpse. And that's the mechanism worth pausing on. None of the 6 paths were alive in the way we usually mean it. Each body was pierced through with black receiver rods, thin metal pieces driven into the flesh. And through those rods, Nagato transmitted his chakra and his will from far away. He never stood on the battlefield himself. He sat elsewhere, hidden, and moved these bodies like extensions of his own nervous system. So the human path's terrifying mind reading was, in truth, Nagato reading minds through a dead man's hand. You'd expect a body performing such a precise, invasive technique to look plain, almost clinical. It's the opposite. The human path had one of the most distinctive appearances of the entire group. Long, wild orange hair falling past the shoulders, and pale, sharp features that stood out immediately. When you line up all 6 paths, they share the same ringed Rinnegan eyes and the same piercings, which can make them blur together into one uniform threat. But this one you could pick out of that crowd at a glance, just from the silhouette. So the body that specialized in stealing hidden things was, ironically, the hardest of the 6 to hide. Put those pieces together and you get a portrait that doesn't quite match its reputation. People remember the human path, if they remember it at all, as the creepy one that touches heads. But functionally, it was the reason Pain always seemed to know too much, always seemed to be one thought ahead of the village. It located the target. It mapped the defenses. It turned the enemy's own memories into Pain's playbook. And it did all of this under a hard limit almost no other technique carries. Each answer cost a life, so there was never a chance to double-check. Which brings us back to the pattern that runs through every part of Pain. It looked like a single, frightening trick, a hand on a forehead. But underneath, it was a quiet, precise, one-shot machine for knowing everything, right up until you understood exactly what it cost. Behind the familiar appearance of Rinnegan, there's a story that quietly turns everything you assumed about power in this world upside down. Because when you first see those eyes, your instinct is to read them as strength that belongs to the person wearing them. That's the natural assumption, and it's wrong. Let's start with what the Rinnegan actually is. It's the ripple-patterned purple eye, marked by those concentric rings that spread out from the pupil like circles moving across still water. Within the series, it's described as the most exalted of the 3 great eye powers, placed above even the Sharingan and the Byakugan, sitting at the very top of that hierarchy. So the moment you notice it, the story is already telling you that you're looking at something rare, something that isn't supposed to exist in ordinary hands. And the legend around it only deepens that impression. Inside the world of the story, the Rinnegan is said to have belonged to the Sage of 6 Paths, the mythic founder of ninjutsu himself, the figure credited with bringing the ninja arts into existence in the first place. So seeing those eyes on Nagato didn't just make him powerful. It framed him as something almost godlike, a living echo of a legend, as if the origin of all ninjutsu had somehow returned in human form. That's the setup the series hands you. A man born with the eyes of a god. But here's what almost nobody knows the first time through. Nagato didn't earn these eyes naturally. He wasn't born a chosen inheritor of that ancient bloodline the way the legend would suggest. The surprising truth, revealed much later, is that the Rinnegan he carried was never really his. Those eyes originally belonged to Madara Uchiha. They were implanted into Nagato when he was still a child, placed there quietly, deliberately, by Madara himself. And that single fact flips the entire picture. Because the man who looked like an untouchable god, the one whose eyes seemed to prove he stood above everyone else, was in truth a boy who'd been chosen as a vessel. Madara implanted the Rinnegan specifically so he could pull Nagato's strings from the shadows, using him and the power those eyes provided as a long-term instrument in a plan Nagato didn't fully understand. So the very thing that made Nagato seem like the most independent, most exalted figure in the room was actually the leash that tied him to someone else's design. The symbol of his godhood was also the mark of his captivity. Now, sit with the ripple pattern for a moment, because even the design carries meaning. Kishimoto shaped those concentric rings to look like ripples spreading across the surface of water, circles moving outward from a single point of disturbance. And that motif was chosen with care. Nagato was born and raised in the Hidden Rain Village, a place defined by constant, soaking rainfall, a village where water is always falling and always moving. So the eye that seemed to come from an ancient myth also quietly matched the world its wielder actually came from. The rain-soaked child and the ripple-patterned eye belonged to the same landscape, even if one was inherited from a stranger. Then there's the part that explains why any of this mattered on the battlefield. The Rinnegan grants control over all 6 of the paths and their techniques at once. That's the crucial detail. It isn't a single ability with a single trick. It's mastery over an entire spread of powers held together in one place. And that's precisely why a single wielder could do the impossible thing that defined Pain, piloting 6 separate bodies as though they were one. Each of those bodies handled a different path, a different piece of the whole, but the mind directing them was unified. So the 6 figures who walked into battle as separate opponents were, in truth, a single terrifying god of pain wearing 6 faces. And when you put those threads together, the counterintuitive shape of it becomes clear. The Rinnegan looked like proof of a person standing at the peak of everything. The top eye, the founder's eye, the mark of a legend. But the closer you look, the more it becomes a story about borrowed power. Nagato commanded 6 bodies as one, which made him seem like the most complete, most self-contained force imaginable. Yet the eyes that let him do it were placed there by someone else, for someone else's purposes. So the very completeness that made him look like a god was assembled by the hand of the man quietly steering him. That's the quiet truth underneath the ripple. The most exalted eye in the series, resting in the face of a man who looked untouchable, and belonging, all along, to someone who was never truly free. The god of the hidden rain, holding a power that was only ever on loan. If you look closely at Naraka Path, you'll notice something odd about it right away. Of all 6 of Pain's bodies, this one never looked like the dangerous one. It didn't hit the hardest. It didn't move the fastest. On a battlefield full of gravity and destruction, the Naraka Path often just stood there, quiet, almost passive. But that stillness was the trick, because the real weapon here was never the body at all. It was the thing summoned beside it, a giant purple head rising from the ground, known as the King of Hell. And this is where the strange twist begins. That enormous head could restore the other paths to life. When one of Pain's bodies was struck down, the Naraka Path would call the King of Hell forward, and the fallen body would be repaired and revived, ready to fight again. So, imagine facing Pain, defeating one of his bodies, feeling that small moment of relief, only to watch it stand back up as if nothing had happened. That was the illusion of a god who could not die. Not real immortality, but something that looked exactly like it. Yet the King of Hell had a second purpose, and it's easy to miss. It wasn't only a healer. It was an interrogation tool. When the Naraka Path seized an enemy and asked a question, the answer mattered in a very literal way. Tell the truth, and nothing happened. But lie, and the king of hell would open its mouth and reach out, pulling the soul straight from the target's body. So people questioned by this path tended to be honest, not out of fear alone, but because the alternative was losing your life the instant you spoke a falsehood. A judge and an executioner, folded into a single summon. That design wasn't random either. Kishimoto based the King of Hell on Enma, not the monkey summon, but the figure from Japanese and Buddhist tradition who judges the souls of the dead and decides where they belong. It fits perfectly because Pain's entire theme was playing God over life and death across the hidden rain. Here was a body that could give life back to his allies and tear it away from his enemies, watched over by a face borrowed from the mythological lord of the underworld. The symbolism was hiding in plain sight. And behind all of this hides something even more interesting. Because for all its power, the Naraka Path carried a fatal flaw, and it was the very thing that made it so strong. Think about it. This was the body that revived the others. It was the anchor of Pain's supposed immortality. But that meant it was also the single point everything depended on. Take away the healer, and the whole system collapses. Jiraiya was the first to sense this. During his fight in the hidden rain, he began to understand that Pain's bodies were connected, that the revival had a source. He didn't survive to finish the puzzle, but the thread he pulled on was the right one. Later, Naruto reached the same conclusion and acted on it directly. The lesson was simple but decisive. If you destroy or separate the Naraka Path first, the other bodies can no longer come back. So Pain's greatest strength, the ability to resurrect, quietly doubled as his greatest weakness. The god who couldn't be killed could in fact be killed. You just had to break the right body before the others. There's one more detail that makes this path feel even more human, in a strange way. The corpse used for the Naraka Path wasn't Nagato's own. None of the 6 were. Every single path was a real, dead shinobi that Nagato controlled from a distance, threading his chakra through the bodies while his true self stayed hidden far from the fighting. And the body chosen for this particular path once belonged to a captured ninja from the hidden waterfall, Takigakure. A person with their own life, their own village, their own name, now standing as a puppet summoning the Lord of the Dead. So when you put it all together, the Naraka Path becomes this quiet paradox. It was the body that looked least threatening, but held the most important role. It could grant life and steal souls in the same breath. It wore the face of a mythical judge while being, underneath, the borrowed corpse of a fallen enemy. And the very ability that made Pain seem invincible was the same crack that let his enemies bring him down. That's the lucky turn hidden in Pain's design. His opponents didn't need to be stronger than a god. They just needed to notice which body mattered and strike it first.
Everything Nagato built on top of that head, the revivals, the endless standing back up, the illusion of a god who could not fall, all of it rested on a single vulnerable point, waiting quietly to be found. And so we close our journey through the hidden corners of the Naruto world, from Pain's 6 shadows to the quiet stillness of the Naraka Path. Thank you for wandering these stories with me tonight, as sleep drifts in like soft rain on a distant rooftop. Let these tales carry you gently into the dark. Sweet dreams.